All right, looks like we're live. Welcome, everyone. All right, so tonight's topic is we are going to be talking about boundaries. And we're going to talk about what a boundary is, when you should set them, and why boundaries can be challenging to set for some people, understanding the good and the bad ways to set boundaries. Hey, Prophet, welcome. The good and the bad ways to set boundaries, how to get better at setting boundaries, and then also how to help others set boundaries if they struggle with it. So, being able to identify that and help others with that is a good situation. So, for those of you that are first time joining me, my name is Tina. I'm a happiness coach and I help people deal with um, feelings of depression, anxiety, frustrations, anger, sadness, any of those more challenging emotions, and helping them move to a happier place. And I do this by sharing my own personal story, my experience, strength, and hope to be able to help you um, take practical pieces of what I share and implement this in your life today so that you can start the journey of healing and helping yourself and others around you get to a happier place. Okay? And I will often not only give personal experience, so for my background, I've experienced a lot of trauma, physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, all of those kind of things. If you take the ACEs test, which is an adverse childhood experiences test, I get a 10 out of a 10. Not something that you want to get perfect on, but I only tell you that to show you that I have been to certain places and I've done a lot of healing work and I've been able to move myself through this. So, this is why I share um, exactly what it is that I've been through. Would you rather be in the middle of the woods with a man or a bear? Well, first of all, it depends on the man, but if it's a man that I don't know, I would probably take my chances with the bear. Um, just because I happen to be pretty good with animals. Men, a little bit more unpredictable sometimes. So, um, and even those, I'd find a way. I'd probably find a way that I'd want to be compassionate and caring, and that usually is enough to scare most guys away that they end up fucking ghosting you anyway. So all I'd have to do is be extra loving, and they'd run away. So I have this natural knack for it. Either way, I'm gonna be good. So that's a little tongue-in-cheek way of dealing with that issue. So let's get dive into the topic at hand. But thank you for the comment and the question, and I love the interactions. And if you guys do have questions, please feel free to type those in the chat. So, setting boundaries. This was challenging, and I'm going to go back to when I was first in my healing journey and learning how, first of all, that I wasn't setting boundaries and what those look like. And that took a lot of inner work for me because of the environment that I grew up in. I wasn't taught that, you know, what happened to my body was okay, that, I could say no to things. Hey, Liv, I'm doing well. How are you? Welcome. So we're talking about boundaries tonight. And do you guys have any challenges? Do you find setting boundaries is easy? Is it all good? So for me, it was really challenging, and I had to start to learn what it is that I wanted and what I didn't want, what my needs were, and that it was okay to set certain boundaries. And it was really something like when I first started, it was something really, really small. And so if you do have a hard time setting boundaries, learning to do this in small chunks in things that are not so important. So one of the things, because I was in my late teens, so I was like 19, And one of the things that I wanted to do was I was still living at home. My mom was still doing laundry most of the time. And I said, you know what, Mom? I'm going to do my own laundry now. And it's so funny sometimes how, especially if you've grown up in a family dynamic where there weren't healthy relationships, right? You know, there's some toxicity that happened, and growing up, there definitely was for me. So one of the things is my mom didn't like that, so she felt like that. I don't know how she felt, but it seemed like she didn't like the loss of control or something. So something as simple as it seemed logical to me. I'm like, hey, you don't have to take care of my laundry. I'm going to be an adult now. I'm going to do my own laundry. You don't have to do this. I'm not, you know, just leave mine alone and I'll take care of it. And the funny thing is the reaction was she would sneak into my room and take my laundry. And she would do my laundry. Had I known as a younger child that this was an easier way to get her to do it, I would have done that more. But in this particular case, I was setting the boundary that I was going to do it myself. And I had to reset this boundary over and over and over again. And it was some of the craziest excuses. Sometimes it was like, well, I didn't have enough to fill the washer for mine, so I went in and grabbed yours. And I'm like, okay, that made sense for the whites, but why'd you take my darks then? Right? You know, kind of thing. And so it was kind of silly like that. But the people around you can have some very strange reactions when you go to set boundaries, even for simple ones. They might be, you know, they get bent out of shape about it, they get weird about it, all of those kind of things. So, this is why it's really important to understand why you're setting a boundary so that when people have weird reactions to it or they try to test, do you actually really mean it? That you have a good understanding, a solid foundation as to why you want to set that boundary in the first place and why it's important for you to hold it. So for me, it was important as a way of me taking responsibility for things in my own life. And so I did that in small ways, and this was one of the small steps that I took forward. And so, why I share that is so that you can look for ways that you can take a small step forward in something that you know that you need to set a boundary for and that maybe you haven't. And when I look back in those early days of when I was first setting boundaries, it really becomes a challenge because you're essentially drawing a line in the sand, and some people are not going to like that. And when I was first doing this was something that was really challenging. So it brought up, doing this one act brought up all of these other insecurities, and then you have to deal with those and deal with the emotions that are brought up there, especially when you take into consideration the context of the environment that I grew up in. So in the context of being sexually abused, I did not have a choice that even if I did set a boundary, which I did many, many times as a child, trying to set boundaries saying, do not touch me, I don't want this, and to have those boundaries ignored. And so when this happens repeatedly, you start to develop a belief system that it doesn't matter if you set boundaries, people aren't going to listen to them and you don't have any power. So this is something that can get ingrained, and it doesn't have to be as extreme as sexual abuse like it was for me. There were all kinds of other examples. But this is one that is like a tangible one that I can kind of give to you. So then I learned that what happens to my body was not something that I had a say in. And the other thing, so that was when I did set the boundary and then they were deliberately crossed. So that was one experience. And then the other experience is I would set the boundary, they would listen to the boundary and not do it, but they would find other ways to punish me for setting the boundary. and withdraw all kinds of contact, all kinds of support. Now I was treated like I was the evil bad person, and they kept pushing that until I moved the boundary myself and said, okay, well, it's not that bad. I was being unreasonable. I was just being difficult. And that is even fucking worse than somebody physically crossing your boundary, because now that's a mind game that was actually played, right? And so now these are pretty extreme. So abuse is on a spectrum, right? A continuum. What one person may find abusive, another person may not, depending on what your personal experiences have been. Unfortunately, I have a really high tolerance for because of what I've been through. So there isn't a whole lot that ruffles me, and I let a lot of things slide, which unfortunately makes people think that I am not able to set boundaries. But I can fucking assure you, I can set a boundary, and when I do, it's pretty firm. Um, so, not all the time. There's still some areas, and we're going to touch on that in a little bit. So, when you get persuaded to change your boundaries, so that sexual abuse, obviously, that's a pretty extreme example. Let's bring this to a more business-like one of examples of where somebody can cross your boundary. You tell somebody that, that they can't take something from your desk, and they go and they take it anyway, and they go and use something, or they eat your lunch. Because I worked at this one place, this one guy, everybody kept eating his lunches. I don't know what was up with that, but maybe it was because he was a chef before and everybody knew he was a chef, so maybe there was something there. But either way, so that is something where you've set a clear boundary and somebody steps over it. Okay. Now, another one is where, say, you set a boundary of maybe you tell your boss, I can't work any overtime this week because I've got these things going on with my kids, and it's got to be just this week. I can't do it. And now the boss says, okay, sure, no problem. But then they do all kinds of other little things to get back at you, give you like worse assignments, be extra critical, call you out in a meeting, all these little subtle things that can end up happening. And now you end up changing your boundary because it's just not worth it, right? That is a more subtle sign, but those are also signs of toxicity and abuse that can happen in the workplace. And you have to be careful in how you persuade, how you negotiate, that you are not doing it in a manner that is actually abusive, right? That you're pushing the envelope, right? Did somebody tell you no and you just kind of keep pushing, and it's kind of like you have this kind of rapey energy to you, that it's just push, push, push. It's like, I'm just going to keep pushing until they give in, and then it's their idea, then it's their fault, right? And then you don't have to take responsibility. That is something that you have to watch for, and make sure that you're not doing that just because you know that something needs to get done. You have to up your skills of persuasion and understanding how to attract people to do what it is that you want them to do, rather than forcing them. Because yes, you can force them into it, but that's only going to be a short-term gain, and there's long-term consequences for that. Okay? Because that person, even though they may comply to your wishes, they will always remember how you made them feel. And so the next time you come up with a request, it's now going to be something that is filtered through that feeling that you created. Did you create a feeling of goodwill, or did you create a feeling of they were forced to do it and now they don't feel comfortable? Now they don't fully trust. Now they're a little bit more closed off. And this can happen slowly over time. Maybe it's not a big deal and you're like, oh, Tina, you're making this too much. And I can promise you, all these little things, when they start compiling and they start adding up, it starts to become a heavy burden. And then all of a sudden, something happens and you don't understand what the big deal is because you're not factoring in all those other times that they silently complied. So be careful if somebody does set the boundary, and maybe it's something that you can't comply to, or you really need to be able to talk this through and really have the communication and the conversation as to what's happening and why it's important, right? So those are two examples, personal ones and a professional one, of what boundaries are and how somebody's past trauma can end up causing them to maybe be resistant to either setting a boundary or how they've experienced it when those boundaries get pushed. Maybe you don't think it's a big deal to kind of push the boundary or kind of, be a little bit firmer and try to get them to do it anyway. Just remember that based on somebody else's previous experience, they may comply, but you might not know the damage that you're doing behind the scenes. So be careful with that. And it's a word of caution to leaders to be able to understand, because even if you yourself haven't been through trauma, somebody on your team probably has been, and whether or not they've actually done the inner work to heal from that is a completely different story. They may be a little bit more sensitive to it, but it's a matter of understanding what's going on so that you're aware of it and that you can have proper communication around it. I'm not saying don't enforce a boundary or don't try to request something if somebody sets a boundary that you don't agree with, and now you need to talk that through. Okay, so that is the first thing. So setting boundaries. The second thing is, for somebody like me, when I was first setting boundaries, it was really challenging, and I'd be my own worst person to cross that boundary because I had to work through the emotions and the fears that came up around setting boundaries, that I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, when am I going to get in trouble? When are they just going to cross the boundary anyway? So to have them respected was something that was new and foreign, and I had to start building evidence of setting these small boundaries and seeing that the world wasn't going to end, that I wasn't going to get manipulated and gaslit into believing that what I asked for was wrong. And so I had to learn to start to build that up, and I did that in a slow way, starting with things that were easy, like when the waitress got my order wrong, or they um, even simple things of like when people would ask me if I wanted to do something or go someplace on the weekend, setting the boundary or just even speaking up. In this particular case, it was hard just to even speak up, let alone draw a line in the sand saying, no, I don't want this, right? But just speaking up and saying, you know what, I don't really want to go there. So learning to understand what you want and what you need is really important piece of that inner work, and that is going to be something that's ongoing, especially if you had a lot of conditioning from your past experiences, whether that's from childhood or previous work environments, that what you wanted did not matter, that what you thought did not matter. So maybe you got conditioned into believing that you don't voice your opinion, you don't contradict your boss, you don't tell them that something that they're doing is incorrect. And behaving like that can cause a lot of problems in the workplace, especially as a leader. I know I had to deal with some people that reported into me that they had been through some really abusive situations in the past in their work environment, and I think they were also dealing with some stuff at home. And more than likely, I didn't get to know her at that level, but more than likely there was something going on from her childhood that she was repeating this pattern throughout. But I was aware enough and I had done enough inner work to be able to recognize this, and had to provide her extra evidence that to show her that when she's dealing with me, that I preferred her to speak up. I preferred and I rewarded her when she did give me contradicting information. I had to provide her that safe place by allowing her to tell me I was wrong and be able to receive that information, accept it, and not punish her for that. And as she started to feel more comfortable with me, what ended up happening is she would bring issues up that were that she was before too afraid to bring up. And this allowed me a lot more information coming to me that I could solve more problems, and I could also mitigate any challenges because she felt it was okay to open up to me. So being able to create that kind of environment where your team will speak to you, they feel comfortable opening up and telling you what's really going on. And you may not be aware of how much they're holding back because of something they've experienced in the past, that it wasn't safe to speak up or say what's going on, or maybe they were punished saying you're not supposed to rat out the other team, all of this kind of weird stuff that is important for the job to get done properly. So understanding that even when you set the boundaries, so I had this with another example where um, the person was, I was giving performance reviews, and they were so terrified at having a performance review done for them that they were like literally shaking in my office. And I'm like, there's nothing I did to actually warrant that kind of behavior that they were so afraid. But part of it was because they did, I gave them a chance on a position when I hired them, and I took them on because I saw their potential and I was willing to do the extra work to train them on the skills that they lacked. Because I knew that this person had a good work ethic, that they were strong in these areas, and that they were worth the investment. And they had never experienced that before. So that brought up for them a lot of shame, a lot of like, am I worthy of this kind of feelings, right? So once that's the thing is once you start getting your needs met in a healthy way, it's that alone can be a triggering event for somebody. So even if you've created a beautiful work environment and you're like, what the hell's going on? Like I thought I did all these things, Tina, and some of the stuff I did what you told me to, and now this other thing is happening. And I want you to be aware that when somebody has been in toxic environments and they now start um, being in a more healthy environment, it can trigger up memories and feelings and emotions of all the times where their needs weren't being met. And that can be really difficult for somebody to process, especially if they've had years of this kind of stuff that they have never looked at, they have never unpacked it. So you could end up triggering somebody just by having a really good work environment, and good for you if you've done that, you've created that kind of environment. But just know that you could be hiring somebody on that has all the skills, all the knowledge, and they're able to get through the process. And then all of a sudden, they're like now in this new environment, and it's very triggering for them. Just like it was for this person, where they they were grateful, they were happy about it, they were appreciative of having a different environment, but just having that care, kindness, and compassion for that person to be able to give them that support. And we went through the performance review process and giving feedback. You know, it was a two-way street. They gave their thoughts on where they were at, and then I would provide feedback as well. And so this poor person was waiting for me to like drop the hammer on them of, you did this wrong, you did that wrong, da 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 da. And they weren't used to my style where it was actually constructive feedback, where it's helpful feedback, and it was more heavily focused on the things that they were doing right. That nobody should be coming into a performance review believing that, okay, now this is the 1 hour that they get every year where they just get the shit kicked out of them of here's all the things I've been dying to tell you, and here's because I've had those kind of performance reviews too. It's like here's all the things that you've done wrong, and this is why, and I'm telling you all this stuff so that you only get this much of an increase, right? Because a lot of times in corporations, performance reviews are tied to your annual increase or salary increase, whatever. So sometimes, even if you did a good job, those would be used and leveraged against you because you had to have a certain number of people that were in this kind of percentage increase, this kind of percentage increase, and there's like a whole tier and there's a structure. And even if everybody on your team did an amazing job, you still had to slot some people in the needs improvement category. And that was a shitty thing to have to do because it was based on averages and analysis rather than on a personal individual performance, right? So that kind of got off topic. Let's get back to the setting boundaries. And so sometimes even when you're doing everything right, you can well, it's not you that's doing it. Know that it's a healthy response. Think of it like somebody who has been through hypothermia, right? They were plunged into freezing cold water. They were in there too long. You take them out. You don't dunk them in hot water. It's going to be extremely painful for them. Even though you think, well, that'll help bring their temperature up, that's too big of an extreme for them. So you have to know where they're at and assess that situation and help them move along gradually so that it's not so painful, even though it's the right course of action, right? Um, so, and allowing them to get used to it and giving them positive reinforcement for being able to open up and share their thoughts, especially when they're opposing thoughts to somebody else. It's like make sure that somebody, if there's 10 people in the room, this is one of the things that I was really good at in corporate. If there's 10 people in the room and everybody has got the same opinions, there's 9 people, they're all like, yeah, we want to do this, and we're all in agreement. And then there was that one person that gave a counter argument of why we shouldn't. And even though the vote went ahead and we, went forward with the thing, I would also make sure that I gave proper praise and encouragement to the person that dared to voice a countering opinion, because the last thing I wanted was to be surrounded by a bunch of people that would just tell me yes because that's what they thought I wanted to hear. And I know I was guilty of this because that came from the wanting to avoid punishment and the people pleasing stuff that I was conditioned through the abuse that I went through to just learn to gauge what somebody else wanted. And I was good at being able to, somebody would say jump, and I'd be asking how high on the way up, kind of thing. And so I was good at being able to anticipate people's needs, and that was a skill that I learned as a survival mechanism for the trauma that I had been through. So I was really good at that, which made me a friggin' excellent employee. And it brought up a huge number of challenges when I jumped into entrepreneurship, because guess what? There's nobody here to tell me what to do. And even I have to sit and understand what is it that I want. And although I've done this a million times for a corporation, when you have to do this just for yourself and you have to work through those feelings of, is this the right thing? And you have no feedback loop, and you have to really fully trust yourself in this process. And that can be a huge challenge. And this is why I like to work with business owners to be able to help them, because getting that objective opinion, getting that objective insight of how to deal with those emotions, especially when you can't really talk to that to your team because you don't want to bring up fear, you don't want to take that home to your spouse, and all of that kind of stuff. You aren't sure who you can talk to because what if they're a competitor and you spill the beans and now they're, stealing your stuff or whatever. Like, there's all kinds of challenges that entrepreneurs go through in dealing with these emotions and being able to set healthy boundaries, right? Even with the team and with themselves, right? So now, enforcing boundaries, this is another thing. So once you actually decide where that line is and where you've drawn that in the sand and you're not going to cross it, not going to go past this. And it can be easy if there's somebody who you don't really care about, or they're an acquaintance or something. It's like, no, I said I'm not going. I'm leaving here by 9, and that's what I'm doing, right? But now, how do you deal with that when that's somebody that's close to you, that's somebody that cares for you, and you don't want to upset them now? Or, it's your kids and you let them push the boundaries a little bit, right? And then they start to learn, oh, okay, the boundary isn't as firm. It's like, oh, I can move this fence a little bit. So it becomes a lot harder to enforce a boundary with somebody we love and trust, because we don't want to upset them. We don't want to cause problems, or it's not worth the argument kind of thing, right? So, and I know guys are just as guilty at pushing those boundaries out and letting things slide because they don't want the argument, they don't want the fight, they don't want the tears from their girlfriend or wife or whatever, right? And so learning to be comfortable with those emotions and learning to allow other people to have their reactions, like I had mentioned at the beginning of the talk. And if you've missed that, you can catch that on my YouTube channel, Coach Tina B 125. Make sure you check that out and subscribe so you get notified when I've uploaded the live replays, because that's the only place that you're going to get the live replays. So yeah, it can be very challenging, and allowing other people their weird reactions and resetting those boundaries. Like I talked about in the beginning, when my mom was stealing my laundry, when after I set the boundary of I was going to do my own laundry. It's something really crazy, but it can, little things can have really weird reactions to other people, and it makes them uncomfortable. And just the amount of time it took you to get to the point where you decided that you needed to set that boundary, then give them that amount of time as well to adjust to the new way of being, right? So there's change, and the way that you communicate it matters as well, on how receptive they're going to be. And their personality, of course, matters in how receptive. How big of a threat this change is for them is going to be a determinant of how respectful they are of that boundary. So, so this also plays into those two examples, the acquaintance and then the trusted person. So this happened as well, and it's not so much in boundary setting, but it's a good correlation. So I was at a company that we did mass layoffs. There were over 700 people that went on the first round. And that was really challenging. It was sad and everything. But at the same time, we knew that the company had really grown to a size that there was some excess that needed to be trimmed. And so this was an opportunity to give people a chance to go work someplace else. A lot of support was given to them. They were given training on resume building and placements and all those kind of things, right? And some people were placed with other companies, with vendors and stuff like that, that had happened to be hiring. So there was as much as possible, a seamless transition that you can have for 700 people being laid off. Now, so that was an easier, we could understand it. It was easier to set that boundary, draw that line in the sand, and going, you guys are on this side of it, and the other people that are still remaining. Where it got harder is the second round that we did. And although there weren't as many people that were laid off, now that was more of a challenge because these were people that were really good workers, really good people that you didn't want to lose, but unfortunately the numbers just didn't line up. And losing those people, and some people were really long term dedicated employees that had spent their pretty much entire career at the company, and seeing those ones let go, those ones caused a lot of hard feelings. I know for me that that was pretty devastating watching that, even though I got to keep my job, even though I was still at the company, seeing people who had dedicated their lives to the company get let go was something that brought up a lot of emotions, not just for me, but for other people. And it really caused a lot of demoralization within the company. And that led to bringing in some change management, and changing the culture of the company, right? To rebuild some positive feelings and give that sense of security that even though we had to let those people go, here's the people that we have left. This is what we're building together. So there's a proper way of being able to reinforce positivity even when you've had challenging or traumatic experiences, in that particular case, a business trauma, right, of losing or doing mass layoffs, right? And that's traumatic for not only the employees but the business owners as well, because that's saying that we missed the signs, we missed the things, and we weren't paying attention. We got too big and have to cut back. We weren't managing things properly. If you're losing people and you're cutting back people, you aren't managing the growth, and you aren't developing your people to be able to stand into those positions in a way that will enable additional growth, right? So somewhere along the lines, there was some sort of breakdown, and being able to do that inner work for the business is also important, is understanding where did we go wrong? How did we get to this situation? Because ideally, if you have a company, you want to build that company and build the people that come in, and you want them to stay with that company, because there is a cost associated getting rid of people and having to rehire. And yes, at times there are people that it's much easier just to cut your losses and put up that boundary and say, this isn't working out, right? Obviously, there's times where that is the case. But when it gets to the point where you've allowed your organization to grow to such a point that you now are putting in a system and looking to do mass layoffs, that is like a divorce, right? That is traumatic, and it's painful for you and the people that get left behind, right? To go through that. And so being aware of the signs of what led up to that, and instead of looking to cut those heads, how can we grow those people into positions so that they can develop the company and build the company even stronger, right? So that is one of the things that you want to be able to do, right? And then, so there's good and bad ways to set boundaries. So bad ways to set boundaries is put up a wall, just state one fact, don't tell them why, don't tell them how you feel, don't tell them why it's important that this that you need to set this boundary, how you're feeling with it, and why this is going to make you feel safer, right? Um, so that would be a bad way of setting a boundary, right? So cutting somebody off, stonewalling them, giving them the silent treatment, not communicating, um, and or just being like aggressive and mean and all those kind of things. Those are not good ways to set boundaries. Yes, that might get the person away from you. They might leave you alone, but that's not going to foster a relationship. And so it's fine if you have no care of whether or not that relationship continues. But if you do want a relationship to continue, you also want to live with integrity and be in alignment of those kind of things, then you want to set those boundaries in good ways, which means communication, understanding, um, getting feedback of how they feel about this kind of stuff, and are they understanding what the actual boundary is and why it's important to uphold that boundary, and what the parameters are, right? So is this an every time thing? Is this, only for this particular situation? You need to be really, really clear when you're setting a boundary, why you're doing it, why it's important for you, and why it will make you feel better. So, and set it in a way with an expectation that, of course, this other person is going to follow this boundary. This isn't a personal thing against them. This is something that you need to feel safe for you, something that you require, rather than making it about them being a bad person and now I have to set a boundary. Because sometimes people will just do things because they think that's okay. And if we never speak up and tell them differently, then we can't expect them to be mind readers. Hey, Armando, hello. Um, so setting boundaries in a good way means communication. It means helping the other person understand why it's important and why the boundary is in place, and what you need to do to sometimes boundaries can be reduced or moved or whatever. Maybe this is a temporary boundary. I need to do this until I feel secure. And so an example for a business one, maybe somebody's health benefits don't kick in until they've been with the company 3 months, or maybe they don't get a certain elevated commission structure until they have reached certain targets or have been with the company a certain amount of time. So sometimes it can be a boundary like that that is set, that there are certain criteria. Right now, we're not going to do it, but after you cross this point, then we'll feel comfortable opening up. So being clear about those kind of boundaries. So there may be a time limit on how long that boundary is in place, and then after the or you see certain criteria being met, then you would feel comfortable removing the boundary, right? So, and letting them know it's not because they're a piece of shit person, it's because this is what you need for you, or your company needs to feel like there is mutual respect, right? So being able to understand that. And so getting better at setting boundaries means we have to look at ourselves, what's important to us, um, what our wants and what our needs are, and what our emotional needs are, right? So I used to have a boss that she was not a morning person, and she liked to come in, get a few things done in the morning, and then go about her day. So she really didn't like any big challenging questions before 10 a.m. She had her coffee. She had her door closed, that she needed to get certain things done. And before 10 a.m., unless the building was burning down, don't bother her. Like, let her do her things, because she was organizing things, and that was her quiet time in the morning to get things organized, right? And she had other earlier meetings, so that's not like when she started. So she had other conference calls and whatever. But from like 9 to 10, this is what she did. And most of us were just coming in and setting up our desks and doing our thing anyway. So it wasn't a big deal, but it was a going joke, right? So it was a fun boundary that was in place. And of course, there were people that would cross those boundaries, but that was not necessarily a bad thing. So get better at setting boundaries, why it's in place, why it's important, and how it helps. And also recognizing if somebody is not so good with setting boundaries, and why you want to maybe take a look at that and call that stuff out, or at least talk about those kind of things, is what'll happen is if they're not good at setting boundaries, they're going to say yes to something that maybe they can't meet. They might say yes to a project deadline, and they know that they can't meet it, but they don't have the courage or the confidence or um, the security to be able to voice a countering opinion. Maybe they know you want it done by this Friday, and they know certain things that will absolutely not allow it to happen for this Friday. But rather than speaking up about it, they say, oh, okay, and then they'll just deal with the consequences when, or just tell you at the last minute why it couldn't happen, right? And it's not their fault, right? And that could be conditioning from a previous work environment, that could be conditioning from um, past childhood stuff, whatever it is, it doesn't matter where it came from. If you recognize that somebody is maybe, and you'll recognize this through a pattern of maybe they say they're going to do something and then they don't follow through. That is a good indicator that they are telling you what it is that they believe that you want to hear. And how you can kind of open this up is saying, something along the lines of, I can see these being potential issues that could make it that we're not going to hit this deadline for Friday. Does anybody else have any other ideas of why we wouldn't be able to hit this? And you open and you invite somebody to provide that feedback rather than them having to come up against you. They have to have the courage to be able to stand up against you. And some people, some cultures too, is you don't speak back to your elders or your seniors or um, your chain of command, that you just don't do that. And or another sign is that they'll send you an email on the side rather than speaking up in the meeting where you could have had everybody talk about something. So I know I've had that kind of experience where somebody has come to me after the meeting was over and said, oh, Tina, I didn't really want to tell you in the meeting, but we can't do this because of these reasons. And it's like, in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, for fuck's sakes. Why didn't you tell us in the meeting when we had everybody together so that we could talk about, oh, shit, we can't do this because of these things and we weren't aware of it. Now that we're aware of it, now we have to come up with a new plan, right? We have to come up with an alternate solution. So this is why it's important. So if you've ever been in that situation of you're like, oh, for fuck's sakes, why didn't they speak up? Why didn't they say something? That is a good indicator. One, that maybe it's nothing that you're doing that is threatening or intimidating, but you've got somebody on your team that doesn't feel comfortable. So that is a good signal that you now have to work with that person and give them a lot of positive reinforcement and encouragement and invitations to give countering opinions so that you can condition them to say, show them that it is safe for them to speak up in this environment. And you're definitely going to want that, because you cannot make good decisions if you don't have all the information. And if half of your team or most of your team is too afraid to challenge you, to verbally call out something that could be wrong, then that is going to be a real problem for you. Now, some people you're not going to be able to break of this, and you're going to have to work around it, maybe because they have other good skill sets. But your management team, your supervisors, they all need to know how to do this as well so that they can get this information that is vital to the organization. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a situation like some of the companies that I've been, and you're doing lots of layoffs because there were a lot of things happening in the company that never got communicated back up to you as the business owner. So these are some things of why boundaries are important. what they look like, why some people with the past trauma that they've been through may not actually speak up, they may not set good boundaries, they may not reinforce boundaries, they may not challenge people when they cross the boundaries. All of those kind of things are really important, and they do affect your business whether you know it or not. And you might think, oh, this trauma stuff, Tina, isn't really important and you just have to move forward from where you're at. Yes, I get it. But if you're completely unaware, you're completely oblivious to how these things come up and how these behaviors get created, then you don't know how to counteract them. And the worst thing that can happen in your business is for things to be going on that you are not aware of and that you don't know, and your team doesn't know how to deal with those emotions because it's emotional, it's not logical as to why they're not speaking up and giving their information and giving their ideas, right? So this is these are things that are really important. And if you guys are jumping in at the last minute, you're going to want to go to my YouTube channel, which is Coach Tina B 125, and make sure you click on the subscribe button so that you get notified when I upload these lives. And I hope you guys found that this was helpful and informative, and that you have a better understanding, and hopefully you can take away something from this um, training so that you can start to apply it to your life today. So guys, with that, I'm going to wrap it up, and I hope you have a great night. Have a fantastic day, Jughead. Take care. Bye.